In introduction, I've mentioned that deep digital transformation is not about the technology itself, but what the technology allows you to change on a very deeper personal level. And it's a kind of interesting thing that this is what I'm experiencing trying to create these videos, trying to bring the story out. At the same time, I get pretty confronted with my personal noticing that my language should be better, noticing that I need a little bit more interaction. And what we call this in the domain of research a kind of a bootstrapping process. You create A, and with this A you create a better B, and with this better B you can create a better A, and this way you can go up the ladder, right? That's an evolutionary, we call it evolutionary cybernetics, but I don't want to get too technical there. What I do want to do today in this video is go back to a few statements I made. The first one I made 5 years ago, and the other ones I made 7 years ago. So this is the period of my research, and it will elaborate a little bit what I mean with anticipation research, participation research, how it was used, and how things that I anticipated may be different at this very moment. So let me first elaborate a little bit more on the topic I'm focusing on in this video presented during the conference on innovation.
For me, the most interesting is radical innovation, because you see that many of the incremental innovation can be managed. There are many tools, but there are more and more bigger problems coming to us, and they kind of overwhelm us. We don't have ways to manage the radical innovation. So that's basically why I focus on it.
Could you please tell me briefly what innovation means to you?
So I consider innovation the cultivation of discovery and creativity. So where creativity and discovery are more individual, innovation is always something from systems, organizations, or can be other systems too. So I think that's a big difference, and you often see discoveries that are interested but never get cultivated. So that's the difference. Yeah.
The video needs a few clarifications. First of all, radical has no negative connotation. What I mean from a more technical point is non-linear. So what is the difference between linear and non-linear? Well, if you look at a curve, you could actually predict where it's going to. That's what we call a linear thing. But if there's like a wall and it bumps against it, there's like a non-linear aspect on it, right? You bounce back. So if we would go to innovations and the startup landscape, they would talk about pivots. So at a certain moment, there's like this reflection moment. They decided not to pursue this market anymore, but go into another one or whatever. So those pivots are radical innovations. And what you see is that startups are pretty easy to pivot. But if you have a very large, complex organization, the pivot takes a lot of time, and in that time, actually, the world can already change. So the complexity there is from a personal point of view, much more interesting. Brings me to the last part, that you see that some things get cultivated and other things don't, and the difference between those two is pretty interesting. And that's one of the things I want to get a little bit deeper in by looking at first a few other statements I made 7 years ago.
I kind of see these innovation waves. We had a first wave between 90 and 2000, which actually made us understand what internet means. We have from 2000 to 2010 now, we understood what the social aspect of that link means. I mean, what I'm seeing in the last 2 years, it's a transformation to understanding that it's not just social,
but the social should lead to problem solving. And I see this in open governance, I see this going to open education, there's a big momentum for education. So that's what I expect for the next 10 years to be one of the big waves. And then the next wave we see coming is related to mobilization.
First thing I need to explain about the statement here is that it's a simplification to show a certain pattern. The reality is more complex, but the question is, can that pattern help us understand better what is going on, where we're going, give a little bit grip on all the change. And also the first thing I need to mention is that I talk about the first wave in the 90s, but this wave is based on another wave, which is more to the hardware part, the TCP/IP protocol. In the 70s, it's more between universities, so it's still in a niche. In the 80s, you see the adaptation by many other institutes and as well with the corporate world. So it is a clear cultivation within the larger social structure. We see the same trend with social media. I was talking about open governance and open education. You see, at the beginning, they were very quick to be on track. But now, the past 8 years, I believe that it's going a lot slower in those domains than in other domains. So, which are other domains? First of all, I think the psyche. There's a whole shadow side of this development. I was more of a technological optimist. If I look today with alternative facts, with polarization between teams, with a lot more aggression, basically, you see that this shadow side has popped up. And some of the things that really surprised me, for example, is the behavior at universities. I'll be very clear about that. When I was a student there, and the exam period approached, the campus would be like a desert. There would be hardly anyone anywhere. What I've noticed in those 7 years is that this campus is becoming like this collective peer pressure structure for the students. So because if they're at home, they can get distracted by all kinds of things. We used to go to our room to be not distracted. Well, it seems like now kids, when they're in the room, they're more distracted when they're out of the room. So there's a very changed way. But at the same time, the behavior they're showing me reminds me about monasteries, about how social pressure is creating an environment for you to stay in your own space, right? Hold your space. And that shadow side, I didn't see coming at all. And at the moment, it's creating huge troubles at universities. So that's one aspect. What's the other aspect? Okay, yeah, well, let's go a little bit deeper into what is happening with education. I got another video on that.
I think there is a tsunami coming on to us about education, because now there are 5 billion people getting education based on trying to decrease overpopulation. But those 5 billion people will in 20 years probably also want to grow out of the micro economics climate. So, I mean, I'm trying to do stuff on micro spin-offs as a way to actually also see what happens in 15 years when they want to go to university. That's my focus.
I think the main message I wanted to bring with this tsunami of education, meaning that a lot of people are now getting connected to the internet, getting access to information on the one hand and access to other people on the other hand, therefore gaining intellectual capital and social capital, and those are two good leverages to actually move to financial capital as well. So there is this whole personal cultivation, self-cultivation clearly in speeding up. What I didn't expect is the effect it has on self-discipline. there's a very interesting relation between discipline and innovation. Like the two most disciplined structures, military and the medical world, are also the two where most radical innovations are happening. They are happening at a slower space for an individual, but at a faster space for the organization, for the system. And what I'm noticing, like with the students at university, is that if they don't have the tools to self-cultivate their discipline, so improve their self-discipline, you see that they are creating new structures to have a systemic way of producing that discipline. In those cases, it's peer pressure. And it's the same kind of reinforcement you see with the polarization between the many different opinions happening online, where you have this bubble thinking, creating this kind of boundaries around a certain mindset. And if we go 1 century back and we see how system dynamics on top of people creating a certain discipline transforming the person, we need to start being very worried about that, because we've seen how it can spin out of control. We had the world wars to remind us on that, and I mean there are some notable voices out there that are focusing this on this topic, like get yourself together, start becoming more disciplined. I'm very interested to see how this will evolve, and also, for example, how that affects new organizational structures, where we also are like deconstructing the hierarchy, but in what way will that actually affect the discipline? And there's this whole dance happening there, and I'm gonna finish. Okay, talking about self-discipline, I had to stop myself there because I was moving on into a new story, which is related to my recent work on reinventing organization. It's close to my heart, so it's logical that I get drawn into it. But you see, you need self-discipline to stop. And I'm gonna finish this video to refer to the DIY community, so the do-it-yourself community that is actually trying to, from self-discipline, solve their problems and aggregate that to a different level. And in the next 3 days, I will be going to a conference called Hack Belgium, which is basically applying this deep digital mindset to our larger institutional challenges. Like what we're going to see, I probably will use some of that in later videos. So I hope you've enjoyed, and I hope to see you next week.